I'm here to present the magazine award. John Richardson's remarkable piece is about an extraordinary doctor, the art of medicine, the power of empathy. It is also a story about gender, race, and the unexpected ways that ethics and religion shape our lives. Dr. Willie Parker, a successful OBGYN, set his practice aside to do abortions full-time. Parker is one of only 2 doctors who travels to Jackson, Mississippi to provide abortions at the last remaining clinic in the state. Because he's there only twice a month, and as the need is so great, the cases get backed up, forcing Parker sometimes to see as many as 45 women in a single day. Dr. Parker believes there is more than one way to be a spiritual person. Indeed, he believes that God has called him to perform abortions. Parker gives his patients not just the abortions they're seeking, but also an opportunity to be heard and cared for without judgment, an experience that is sadly rare in the lives of so many women. Parker became a born-again Christian in his teens, and for most of his distinguished career as an OBGYN, he refused to perform abortions. But Parker's study, as Richardson writes so beautifully, his study of radical Christian theology and the Black feminist philosophy of reproductive justice prepared him for a come-to-Jesus reversal when a fundamentalist administrator at his university tried to ban abortions at the campus clinic. It's hard for them to accept that I do abortions because I am a Christian, Parker tells Richardson. Parker eventually left his academic career to become a full-time abortion provider on the very day that George Tiller was murdered in church. Parker perseveres courageously to this day at great personal risk. As Richardson's extraordinary profile tells us, the sermons of Dr. Martin Luther King were a transformative influence on Parker's thinking about abortion, particularly the sermon about what makes the Good Samaritan good. The Samaritan became good, King observed, when he stopped asking, what's going to happen to me if I'll help this person in need, and started asking, what's going to happen to him if I don't help? Parker looked in his soul and asked himself, what happens to these women when abortion is not available? Today, we are at a crisis moment when it comes to abortion access. 2015 is setting a record pace for state-level abortion restrictions. Parker works at the Pink House, the last abortion clinic in all of Mississippi. Governor Phil Bryant, a fierce opponent of abortion, is determined to close it. In 2012, he signed legislation requiring all doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at local hospitals, an impossible standard because no local hospital will grant admitting privileges to abortion providers. The clinic is still open because an appeals court ruled that Mississippi can't force women to go out of state to exercise a basic constitutional right. Mississippi has appealed to the Supreme Court. Only time will tell whether the High Court will hear the case. Justices would be wise before rendering a decision to read John Richardson's remarkable piece.
Thanks. This is a real honor. First, because it's a labor award, and I'm pleased with that, and also because I really respect the journalists who selected my piece, so it's an honor on those levels. I sort of knew, like, within a half hour or a couple of hours that this was going to be an exceptional piece. I don't necessarily do the kind of, like, go out and do good journalism. What I believe is that if you tell a human story really well, that it brings people together. And I had, my first abortion experience was going down to the clinic in Montgomery, where there'd been a bombing. And I interviewed a couple of the protesters outside the clinic who protested every day. And at that time, Sally Mann's book, she's a photographer, there was a big to-do about it. Alabama was trying to ban that book. And I asked them why they hated the book, because I love the book. And it turned out they hadn't seen it. So I went over to the lady's house and sat down in her kitchen, and we looked at Sally Mann's book together, and she was knocked out by it. She just didn't understand that these images were supposed to be disturbing. That was what art was doing to her, was upsetting her. So I thought this was great because I was able to communicate with this person and really come to an understanding. With Willie, I had done another long abortion piece a few years ago, just after Dr. Tiller was killed, and I never got past the nurse's office. I don't know what made Willie decide to, like, show me his whole world. I walked in and we talked for a half hour, 40 minutes, And then he started working, and I expected to be kicked out front, and he said, come on back. And he gave that extraordinary speech to these women about how he had to tell them that abortion would cause cancer and all this stuff that the state had mandated. And then he said, and I don't agree with that. And then he started talking about God and why he does this. And the feeling in the room was really strong. I mean, the women were there, some of them were weepy. And when he started talking about God, it introduced something that was kind of unique and remarkable. And I could feel the comfort that some of the women in the place took from that this was not some amoral, sick, selfish thing that they were doing, but that it was something that a godly man could forgive them for. So then he said, well, come on in my office and sit in on the consultations. And about 15 minutes into the consultations, I was like, now I have too much material. But it just went on like that. We went out to lunch, and he was leaving for Alabama in a couple of days, the day after. And I said, well, gee, I'd sure like to come. And next thing I knew, we were driving across Mississippi, the Freedom Trail in reverse, and talking about racial history and jazz, which we're both fans of. And it was just a beautiful experience, and I came to respect him so much. I think, people have a reason for the things they do, and that's what I try to do with my journalism. I've done John Yoo, I've done Alex Jones, I've done lots of not necessarily good people, although I wouldn't say that about either one of them. But when you go inside their minds and understand their reasoning, there's a human connection, and some of the doubt and fear falls away, as it did with that abortion protester who looked at the Sally Mann book with me. And his way of thinking about how his mental process of how he struggled with abortion from a religious perspective, and finally came to the point where he felt like he would be doing the wrong thing if he didn't do them. I just found that fascinating and so moral, so thought out. I mean, I just stumbled through life. This guy thought it through, took the steps meticulously, and when he came to his conclusion, he dedicated his life to this thing. So I'm just so grateful that he let me in, and he allowed me to see his world. If I could say one thing to people is just let the reporter do his job, because when people shut you out, you just don't get to tell their story, and that's what we're there for. I'd also just like to say the women in those clinics are amazing. I suggested to my sister and my daughter that they become clinic defenders, escorts afterwards, because I've never met people who were so ballsy, strong, confident, and supportive of all the women walking through. They were really fun. And I forget her name, but the woman who ran the clinic in Montgomery, again, she had arthritis so bad she could barely walk around that place, and she was holding on because who else was going to take over the clinic? So it was a privilege to be with those people. I'm so grateful to Dr. Parker and to all you guys. Thank you.